What's up, everybody? My name is Colby Novak with Lens Wars, and this is our review of the Sony FS5 Raw. Now, I know there are plenty of reviews over this camera out there, but we're not going to really concentrate on that. We're going to concentrate more about the raw capabilities of this camera. Now, of course, there is a $500 price tag to get this raw feature, but we're going to talk about those pros and cons in a minute. Now, this camera does have a super 35mm sensor in it, so it's a professional cinema grade camera. It's got all the bells and whistles that you would ever need. So what makes it different? Why wouldn't you just go to, like, say, a Blackmagic that already has 4K RAW internally? Well, that's what we're about to go over in just a second. So our first major point is that, well, it can be a non-RAW camera or a RAW camera. So we've got all of our, AVC HD, XAVC HD. We've got, all the codecs inside. And we've also got that RAW output. Now, of course, it doesn't do it internally, but I mean, you don't necessarily need to do it internally. I mean, it'd be cool, but it's not a necessity. But so it's got that raw 10-bit 4K out support. So what you would need to actually get this raw out would be a recorder of some sort, either a Shogun, which they finally released the Cinema DNG support for the Shogun, and also you could use the Odyssey 7Q, which has the different flavors of Cinema DNG. Oh my God, tongue twister. Different flavors of Cinema DNG supported in that recorder. So one pro of this camera, it is a 10-bit RAW out. Now, what that means is it's got a lot more color data that's coming out of that signal, and it's being processed by your recorder. Now, the only cameras that really beat this are, like the, Alexa Mini and like the Red, but most other RAW cameras are 10-bit, and with the exception of some Blackmagic cameras. But those Blackmagic cameras are really kind of crappy in the high ISO range, which this camera actually performs really well in. And actually, that'll move on to our next big pro of this camera, since it is not a natural RAW camera, so it doesn't come from the factory RAW. It's actually got a very good ISO performance with a base ISO of 1000, and now you strap a RAW recorder onto it. Now you've got this pretty high ISO capable RAW machine, so you can actually pull a lot of that color data and all of that information. You can pull it back in post, which we actually did a video on how to color grade RAW Cinema DNG in a video file, which you can find here. What's also cool about this camera is that it can do a full slow-mo out. So only in HD, it can do up to a constant 240 or 120 frames per second in RAW, which is kind of cool. So you can still have all that RAW, kind of Cinema DNG workflow at 240 frames per second, which is pretty cool. You need a beefy recorder to do this, but it is an option. It is kind of cool, and I think it's definitely a major pro for this camera. Now, another benefit to this camera is that it's fairly cheap. Now, the body alone is, $5 grand, which is pretty competitive for a full cinema camera. And then you can get a cheap, inexpensive recorder like the Atomos Shogun and get 30 FPS 4K RAW. So for about $6 grand, you can get a full RAW video setup, which is actually pretty competitive. Now, yeah, you might say, well, the Blackmagics can do it for cheaper. Yeah, but remember, you're also getting a better ISO performance out of this camera. You're also getting built-in ND filters with all of the extra bells and whistles that come with this camera that Blackmagic doesn't offer, which a lot of the options are the same, but the main point being that I think the ISO performance of this camera is so much better, and I think that's definitely worth the extra boost up. And it's just got Sony ergonomics to it, which a lot of people hate, but I like it. I don't know. People are probably raging right now. Oh my God, the Sony menus suck balls. Which they do, but I've gotten used to those sucky balls, and I like my sucky balls, so. Balls. Now, this camera is also pretty lightweight. We've gotten to play with this camera for quite a while now. It's been probably about a year. And compared to all the other Blackmagic RAW cameras, which I think this camera is in the same competitive range when it comes to RAW performance, it's actually a lot lighter. If you strip this down to its bare bones, it doesn't weigh that much and can easily be put on a gimbal. And since your RAW capabilities are on an external monitor of some sort, that monitor can be, you know, mounted up on top where the handlebars are, getting the weight off the camera, so you can actually balance this thing fairly easy. So it makes gimbal, you know, run and gun stuff really easy, and you can actually get a really good 4K RAW image on a gimbal, and it's not so heavy. Like, you know, say the, you know, the Reds, for instance, you know, they're great and they're really compact, but those suckers are heavy. And I've used the original, you know, Reds, and I've used the new Reds that are out, and they're still fairly heavy compared to this camera. So I think that's another pro to this camera, is that it is lightweight when it's, you know, not fully built up, and you can put the RAW recorder on the gimbal and stuff. You know, you can actually really break this camera down. But if you have it fully built out like we have it, it is kind of heavy. So, but it can be lighter, so just know that. Now, the cons of this camera. Well, to get RAW out of the camera, you have to have a $500 like upgrade, which is not that easy to install. Sony ships you this box, and it's got a product key in there, and you have one shot to install it right. If you mess up on this, like typing in the product key, you're like done. You have to send it off to Sony, and they have to redo it. It is the stupidest thing ever. Like, Sony, I don't know what they were thinking when they did this, but you have, it's stupid. Like, I'd rather just insert it and, you know, like put it on a memory card and it just installs it. Like, oh, it's so dumb. But it's $500 for this upgrade, so that's kind of, you know, a con. But that's what I would expect there to be a, you know, a paid RAW upgrade. That makes sense, but God, just installing is so stupid. You need an external recorder, so it's not enabling RAW internally now, that which would be badass. So if there was like some type of SSD like module you could attach to this thing, that'd be cool. But you're having to go to an external monitor, so it's a RAW out. So it's not internal. And it's not a deal breaker, but it is kind of inconvenient sometimes. So, but you can do it inexpensively. Like I said, the Shogun you can get for $1,000 now, and it's a fully capable RAW recorder. So there's that. Another con is large files. Cinema DNG is not efficient when it comes to file management and file size. Like, compared to the like the Red system, the R3D files are they're good. They're very manageable Red files. It's a laptop capable RAW, but the Sony RAW system with the Cinema DNG out, you know, because it's the only kind of RAW format you can get from this camera. The workflow is not the easiest, but we did go over that in that how to color grade in Lightroom. So, you know, the workflow kind of sucks, but I think if you're doing this professionally and you need that RAW video, it's definitely workable. It's just kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. So there's that. And the last con is that it is bulky. This thing, when fully built, can be a pain. Now, like I said, you can strip it down and it can be super lightweight, but it's kind of hard to use once it's all stripped down, and it's really only good for a gimbal. But when it's all built up with its side handles, its recorder, the V-mount battery you need to power this thing, a big heavy lens, it can get quite heavy, and anything that's run and gun is kind of impossible. You can do it if you get the right workflow and get the right lens on there. It is possible by any means, but it is a little bulky. But I do love this camera, so it's everything about it. I like it. All the cons, you know, they're not deal breakers. I would much rather have the benefits of using this RAW format. So anyway, my final thoughts on this camera is I give it a solid, at least for the RAW out. It's a 5 out of 5 for me. It's affordable. It gives you a very awesome ISO performance. It gives you everything that you would need in a pretty affordable package. So, and that's when it comes to filmmaking, you know, money's always a big game player when it comes to doing this or that. It's affordable. I think if you're in the market to have a RAW capable camera, like a real RAW, not a, you know, RAW to ProRes, any of that stuff, that's still color baked. I'm talking about a RAW workflow, either Cinema DNG or R3D. If you're looking for that kind of workflow, this is definitely an option for you. I think you should definitely consider it. So, yeah, I think it's a good camera, and you should definitely look into it. Always rent before you buy, but definitely look into it. Alrighty, guys, that's it for this video. So if you liked it, you know what to do. But if it sucked, go ahead and hit that dislike button and let me know why you think it sucked. Also, leave comments requesting future videos, and I will see you next time.